I'm Penny S.T., and I'm the host of Peace with Penny. It was the summer of 2014, and our trip to Israel was for our son's bar mitzvah present. My husband had gone back to the hotel, and my son, friends, and I had just stopped in a pharmacy.
Run to the bomb shelter, sweetie. Please hurry. I didn't hear the sirens at first, but the Israelis did. They're used to hearing these things. We ran to the back of the storeroom. It was a 12-foot by 24-foot windowless bomb shelter. My heart's pounding. Boom! Boom! I hear it and feel the percussion of the exploding bombs. I'm trying not to get sick. I look at my 13-year-old son and I think I'll never forgive myself if something happens to him.
It's an excerpt from a speech I gave to the Orange County Jewish Bar Association. It was the first, but not the last time we had to run to a bomb shelter. Our adventure and my transformation is also the subject of my book, Blasted from Complacency, A Journey from Terror to Transformation in Israel. The impact of the war made me want to work on peace of all types, and especially between Israelis and Palestinians. I know that the parents on both sides want their children to play safely in their backyards. The greatest disservice the media has done is to convince the world that there never will be peace in the Middle East. Yet there are pockets of peace even today during war. At Peace with Penny, we have a packed library of interviews of peace organizations whose members are often both Israeli and Palestinian who work together on peace, some for decades. The ways of working on peace are varied and include science, medicine, interfaith, transportation, sports, art, music, environmental conservation, and many more. Is it harder during war? Of course, and many of these peace organizations believe working together now is even more important than ever. Hello, I'm Penny S.T., and I'm the host of Peace with Penny. With the Israel-Hamas war having already lasted 1 year, the Hezbollah conflict in the north, the hostages who should have been brought home by now to be with their families but aren't, and the pervasive antisemitism on campuses, there are plenty of current issues that we wish would just disappear, but unfortunately, my magic wand is broken. At Peace with Penny, we usually discuss the uplifting topics of peace between Israelis and Palestinians that exist, even today during war, since most of media ignores their brave and creative efforts. However, we can't overlook what is happening throughout the world. Let's say we are reporting on this because it's too important not to. Antisemitism is like an evil virus spreading faster than COVID. Unlike COVID, it's nothing new and has been the scourge against the Jewish people for centuries. However, today it is so rampant that in the world it's being normalized. The uptick in anti-Semitism is scary and unconscionable. We want to share with you what it's like to be a Jewish student and teacher on college campuses, given the anti-Semitism and anti-Israel encampments that have dominated life on campus this year. American Jewish Committee CEO Ted Deutsch said in a statement, "As the Jewish community is still reeling from Hamas's brutal attack against Israelis on October 7th, we are simultaneously contending with an earth-shattering increase in anti-Semitic violence. The reported anti-Semitic crimes have taken a severe toll on so many American Jews' way of life. The worst part of this new reality is that young Jews are increasingly on the receiving end of this rise in anti-Semitic hate, according to AGC's State of Anti-Semitism in America 2023 report. Surveys from last year revealed that over 1/3 of Jewish college students have reported needing to hide their Jewish identity on campus, where anti-Semitic incidents have been particularly pervasive, skyrocketing to record levels. Following the release of the data, the AGC noted that the actual numbers of incidents is likely greater, as hate crimes are widely underreported across the country. The FBI data came after the ADL released a report showing anti-Semitic incidents in the U.S. rose 140% last year, reaching a record high of 8,873 outrages, an average of 24 every day. Most of the incidents occurred after October 7th during the ensuing Israel-Hamas war in Gaza. On college campuses specifically, the ADL report found that anti-Semitic incidences rose 321%, disrupting the studies of Jewish students and leaving them uncertain about the fate of the American Jewish community. Now, if you think this won't affect you, if you aren't Jewish, think again. Jewish issues are the world's canary in the coal mine. Don't be surprised if the next iteration of hate more directly impacts you. So we all need to stay vigilant and get a handle on this out of control problem. We are especially going to concentrate today on what's been happening at the University of California Irvine. We have with us a fabulous teacher and mentor, Rabbi Levine. Rabbi Daniel has taught at UCI for 4 years. We'll talk about his experiences on campus and the disappointment for both he and his students when he found out that his contract at UCI was not being renewed. His students were outraged and called his class on Jewish texts one of the most intellectually stimulating courses we have taken at UCI. Given the student support, it certainly made me wonder what was going on. 75 students penned an open letter objecting to UC Irvine's decision. We'll get into more of the details of what happened. Thankfully, Rabbi Daniel will still be teaching at UCI, however, no longer in the history department. Rabbi Daniel also is celebrating his 8th year with OC Hillel and his mission to help students discover the relevance, beauty, and value within Judaism, Jewish identity, and Israel. On a Friday night, you will find him and his wife in their apartment full of students. And yes, Daniel and Shana met at Hillel. In addition to his work with local Orange County college students, Daniel is also responsible for OC Hillel's growing community of graduate students, alumni, and local Jewish professionals. Rabbi Daniel grew up in San Diego before moving to Israel for several years to study in a variety of yeshivot in Jerusalem before ultimately receiving his rabbinical degree from Yeshivat Pirchei Shoshanim. He attended UCLA for undergrad, double majoring in cognitive science and Jewish studies, and subsequently stayed at UCLA for an MA in Jewish history. Rabbi Daniel is adjunct faculty at UCI, teaching courses in Jewish texts and Jewish philosophy, and also the rabbinic fellow at Temple Beth Tikva. Welcome, Rabbi Daniel.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
I wanted to start off with some personal questions. Would that be all right?
Sure.
You grew up in an Orthodox neighborhood in San Diego. What was that like?
It was great. I mean, the Orthodox community is a great community. It's very tight knit. Obviously, Orthodox Jews don't drive on Shabbat. So that basically, you have the entire community fitting in 2 miles in a neighborhood, which I think just creates for a very tight knit community. I mean, I think we can get to this later. One of the big problems that a lot of non-Orthodox communities have now is that they're spread around, a massive area. And so there really isn't the culture of people bumping into each other on the street or walking over to your friend's house on a Shabbat afternoon. So in that sense, it's such a warm and great community. It's also a very intellectual community, right? Orthodox Jews are known for studying texts. Generally, that's, either the Torah or Parsha every week to, in-depth Talmud study or Jewish law. And so I very much did grow up in this, very Jewish intellectual community. So yeah, I mean, it was an interesting experience growing up. Grew up in I went to a tiny high school in San Diego. There were 20 boys in the whole school. So I was one of 5 in my graduating class. So definitely not your stereotypical high school experience, but I loved it.
Also not what I think most people associate with San Diego.
Exactly. That's probably why the school was so small. Yeah. San Diego is not known as a beacon for Orthodox Judaism.
Yeah. If it was Brooklyn or something, maybe.
Exactly.
When you were young, did you think everyone lived that way?
Yeah, we didn't think that everybody lived that way. We sort of recognized, we only had 20 kids in the school, so we figured there had to have been some other high schoolers around in San Diego somewhere. But no, I mean, we definitely had, interaction with people outside of the Orthodox community. But I mean, just lifestyle and values. I mean, obviously everybody in the community was Shomer Shabbat and kept kosher. So it does make it hard to interact with, wider community. But, yeah, we definitely understood that what we were doing was unique.
Could you explain what Shomer Shabbat is for our listeners who are not
sure? So Shomer Shabbat, literally it means, Shomer is a guard. So one who guards the Sabbath. But what it practically means is somebody who won't do any work on Shabbat. And so there's, the rabbis and the Talmud spend, 800 pages debating on what exactly work is. But generally, you could think of it as people who on Shabbat, they won't use electronics, they won't get in a car, they won't cook. And, they generally won't, do anything associated with, labor. So, writing or building or anything like that.
So are you still Orthodox?
No, I think in general, and this is sort of part of my project on campus, and, Hillel's, a proudly pluralistic institution. I think the entire denominational labeling is sort of outdated. I think that, maybe it made sense 100 years ago. But, I meet so many Jews, every year I meet hundreds of Jews, if not thousands, ages 18 to 25, and very few of them identify strongly with the denomination. They say they're proudly Jewish. Obviously, some are more traditional than others, but I don't know how much sense it makes anymore to have these labels of conservative or Orthodox or Reconstructionist or Reform. And, in my opinion, I think a lot of the institutions are sort of outdated in that sense. So I don't still identify as Orthodox. I mean, there's a number of ideological views that I have that probably wouldn't match up with your classic Orthodox, school or institution. But in general, I think that the Jewish community needs to start moving away from, thinking in terms of denomination.
What you're going through on the UCI campus seems like the total opposite of what it was like growing up in a supportive community. Is that what you're trying to build for the Jews on the UCI campus?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, again, just like San Diego, UCI is not known for having a huge Jewish community. I mean, it's certainly bigger than my high school was, but there are probably a couple hundred Jews on campus that are in some way engaged in the community. And yeah, I mean, for so many reasons. I mean, one, just separate than anything Jewish specific or anti-Semitism specific, there's such an epidemic of loneliness among current, really everybody in the world today, but especially, people ages 18 to 25. There's so much research out there that these generations feel more alone than ever. Obviously, people are spending more time than ever on their phones or on media, and, attention is so fragmented. And so the time to just build organic community is so much less. And even when I was in college, which again, wasn't so long ago, it was 10, 15 years ago when I was in high school and college. And, nobody had smartphones. There was never a situation where, I don't know, you'd be waiting for the teacher to come to class and everybody would be on their phones, everybody would be talking. And then when the teacher came in, I mean, this has been the most interesting shift of when, just from a perspective of teaching classes. I had my first day of teaching yesterday at UCI, and I was, there a couple minutes before class started, setting everything up, and there were 50 students, waiting for class to start, and no one was talking. Everybody was either on their phone or computer. And that's so different. I mean, even when I was in college, 10 years ago, class would be, roaring with conversation. And then the first 2 minutes had to be the professor saying, okay, everybody, quiet down. Sometimes they'd have to bang on something. And so even that difference, right? So I think a big part of my job, again, we can get to the Jewish part in a minute, but is just building that community. I also think Judaism has a lot of value to be teaching the Jewish community. And sadly, a lot of people are growing up today without much Jewish background or knowledge. And so I think a lot of people don't know what they're missing, right? They maybe had a bar bat mitzvah, maybe they went to Hebrew school or something. Maybe they have, the weird uncle or something like that who's, more religious, but they think of Jewish tradition as something for either little kids or, oh, these are a bunch of fairy tales that, I'm too old for, or maybe they haven't even thought about it much. And really trying to show students that no, there's so much depth and wisdom in our multi-thousand-year tradition. And, there's so many different views and so many interesting arguments and tensions of values there and everything there. And then, of course, also, it's no secret that there is anti-Semitism. And so obviously the strongest way, in my view, to combat anti-Semitism is to have a strong Jewish community that people can lean on in difficult times.
Alrighty. I wanted to show a clip of how Jewish students are feeling on campuses across the United States.
Being a Jewish student on campus this past year has been extremely challenging.
It's definitely been different than it's been in the past.
Life on campus for Jewish students right now is hard.
It can be quite frightening.
It is so exhausting and hard. I feel like as a Jewish student, I'm going back to campus to fight for my right to exist.
I went to a Jewish day school, I got to college, and I felt pretty comfortable on a campus with 4,000 Jews. And then all of a sudden on October 7th, I got reminded of the hate that's always kind of lurking in the shadows for the Jewish people.
There are people coming from the community who come onto campus and chant horrible things like Intifada, death to Jews, and we're afraid to walk on campus.
Before October 7th, anytime that I would bring up being Jewish or being Israeli, students would meet me with a sense of curiosity. But after October 7th, I'd say that people are less warm and more cold when they hear that I'm Jewish or Israeli.
The ideas underlying the anti-Semitism that we're observing on campus were around long before 10/7. But what has happened since 10/7 is that these ideas have burst out into the open. So this idea of Jews as the people responsible for oppression and all that is wrong in society is circulating, and it's dangerous.
I had a student come up to me and he said that I should go back to where I came from. And I extended my arm and showed him my skin color, and I said, "Where exactly do you think I came from?" I'm both Ashkenazi and Mizrahi, and he was kind of taken aback. He had never really thought that Jews came from anywhere other than Europe before 1948. So it was really astonishing to see the ignorance on campus.
I think a lot of people are desensitized to anti-Semitism. And also I think people are desensitized to what we see online, whether it's, hate speech or anti-Semitic chants. And it makes it really difficult for Jewish students to take part in their activities on campus and off campus as well.
We need support because we're students like anyone else. A university has an obligation to ensuring that its students are able to access the education that we're seeking out in an unbiased way.
Throughout history, Jews have been attacked, and whenever the early warning signs occur, nobody has done anything. Nobody has said anything historically. So now, what I would say to these university directors or presidents is when you see the early warning signs, actually say something. Because when historically we didn't, it just gets worse and worse.
It's really important to note that Israel and the Jewish people are inextricably linked. Israel is a fabric of our identity. It's not something that you can remove from the identity of the Jewish people.
All we really want and all we are really asking for is to be able to exist and thrive as students on our campuses and not to be targeted, not to be bullied, harassed, or feel unsafe because of our identity, just as any student would want.
I think the biggest and most important thing that universities and colleges and administrators can do is follow their code of conduct. Give the appropriate consequences to students' actions like you would do for any other group or any other cause breaking the code of conduct.
University officials, it's your time to step up right now. You see a student body that's suffering, you see a group of Jewish students that feel targeted and scared to be on your campus. Show them that you're there for them. Show up for them.
Universities can start to support Jewish students by asking us what our needs are.
Just showing up means so much. I remember, especially after October 7th, my university has a university chaplain who sort of oversees all of the religious life on campus. And he took the time to come to our vigil. And he's not Jewish, but he really wanted to make sure his students were being taken care of, and that's something I'll never forget.
What brings me joy as a Jewish student? That's an easy question. My community. I am so grateful for our community at Cornell. It is truly special.
Knowing that I have a place to go every Friday night, knowing that at the end of Saturday, we're going to be making Havdalah together. We will be doing that no matter what. That consistency, that support is really what brings me joy.
Seeing Jewish students studying together, talking about how we can apply Jewish values to our broader university community, all of that gives me a huge amount of joy.
It's really amazing to look around, whether it's at Hillel, whether it's at my Jewish fraternity, and to see my Jewish brothers and sisters standing proudly. And it really brings me a sense of hope and optimism for the future.
would you like to comment on that?
Sure. I mean, I think it's all pretty straightforward in general. I mean, I think anyone paying attention understands the difficulty that Jewish students have faced. It has been a pretty unprecedented year on campus. Obviously, there have been, it's not all, either terrible or all rosy, right? Every campus is unique. I think what I've learned is individuals in specific positions of power have a lot of influence. And so, one of the students mentioned, head chaplain on campus, all it takes is one person being either welcoming or opening, or I can easily, and I'm sure this is how other campuses, if the chaplain tweets out from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. I mean, how diametrically opposed the experience of students would be there. And it's like that, every iteration. Obviously, we haven't yet talked about, the faculty on campuses, but I do think professors on a lot of campuses, and again, not all professors, of course, but professors have been sort of the worst in terms of the last year, not only not being of comfort to students, but actually becoming full-on advocates in some cases in support for terrorism. And so, even at UC Irvine, I mean, there are many professors who have basically become terrorist supporters in the last year. Obviously that, one, it's just not good educationally, right? You don't want your, English professor, supporting Hamas or Hezbollah, right? I think that's probably not only is that an educational problem, we also fund them with American taxpayer dollars. So that's a whole other public policy question. But for Jewish students, of course, I mean, if you walk in and your professor's wearing a keffiyeh, which of course is associated with either Hamas or before that Yasser Arafat and the PLO, of course, you're not going to feel comfortable, especially if that class has nothing to do with the Middle East, a psychology class or a, public policy in America class. And so that is the experience that a lot of students have had. For the students themselves that are, participating in the anti-Semitism, okay, they should know a little better, but they are still students, right? They're there to learn. And so I do place more of the blame on faculty for what's been happening this past year than I do students.
Can you give some examples of what you found egregious that some faculty were doing?
Yeah. One, you should never be using your position while you're teaching a class to weigh in on political issues. I've never done it teaching. I obviously have very strong political views. I have never once said in a class, here is obviously who you should vote for. Here's who's obviously correct on the side of a conflict, or, this policy is good or this policy is bad. I think you can try to challenge students one direction or another. So, say you're talking about, let's just pick a complicated example, right? You're talking about abortion, right? I don't want a teacher to say, well, obviously abortion should be legal everywhere. I think a teacher could say, okay, let's talk about it. Here are views on this side. Here are views on that side. What do you, the students, think? And, so engage them there. And you can always be playing devil's advocate for either side and to, again, allow the students to critically think. I think in a lot of classes now that professors have lost the either desire or ability, in cases maybe both, to actually form students' ability to critically think. So instead, they kind of just tell students, here's what you should think. When this comes to Israel, you have faculty who have just said things like, oh, the genocide happening in Palestine, or professors canceling class and telling everybody to go to the encampment, or sending out a reading list of how to support Palestinians. And then you look at their books and it's all just a bunch of anti-Semitic mumbo jumbo. So, so there really has been, I think, a giving up of, real education. And this is also, again, it's a problem because I'm somebody who is very steeped in the humanities, right? Jewish studies generally is a humanities subject. The humanities is just losing respect in American society. I mean, the example I always give is who now is looking to history professors to tell them how to think about the world? I mean, very little. Most people, even students, are getting their views from, podcasts or, other things like that than, actually paying attention. So it's sort of devaluing the value of an education. It's going to hurt colleges. It's going to hurt professors. It's going to hurt the country. And so, really on all levels, even beyond Jews, it's a problem.
Well, it's unfortunately that also is happening from elementary schools, middle schools, high schools. It is going on. As a professor, what was it like with you and your colleagues? Was this a big faction? Was it a small but loud faction? What were you facing as a Jewish teacher?
Listen, it was great for, the Jewish faculty on campus really stuck together. There's now a Jewish faculty group at UCI of like 40 to 50 faculty members. I sort of have always had a very unpopular view about, say interfaith or things like that. Not that I don't think it can, I'll take a step back. I sort of agree with Theodor Herzl, in his diagnosis, just for listeners, Theodor Herzl was the father of political Zionism. And his view was that Jews try to become universalists in Europe. And what I mean by universalists is Jews try to, usher in progressive and liberal policies. And at a certain point, it just became obvious that that wasn't working. And so, okay, if people aren't going to listen to Jews when we ask to be treated as equals, we just have to, worry about ourselves and go, create a country with our own army, blah, blah, blah. So I sort of agree with him, but in an American Jewish context, right? Like I have very little interest. And this is when, I always get people upset. I just don't really care to, again, I have, I know people who aren't Jewish, so I don't mean this as strong as it's going to sound, but I'm interested in the Jewish community and building the Jewish community. If some random person out there has weird views about Jews or is quasi anti-Semitic, I mean, I'm obviously not happy, but I don't care much, and I'm not too worried about trying to change their mind. If we have strong community, both in the state of Israel and in the American Jewish community, it doesn't really matter as much if a bunch of people, don't really understand the difference between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism and, all of those things. And so the view, I think, was born true on, post October 7th. There was very few, and, I know this not just on UCI, I just worked with Hillel, so I basically know people on every college campus in the country. And talking to people, there were such few non-Jews, whether we're talking about chaplains on campus, professors, other student groups, that cared to comfort the Jewish community at this time. So I think this past year has just been more evidence of the fact that Jews just have to worry about ourselves, right? There's no one out there looking out for us. I think see this both, either the Republican or Democratic Party particularly cares about Jews, in this election. They're both happy to try to get the Jewish vote by different ploys. But at the end of the day, no one else is going to come look out for us. I mean, this is sort of Herzl's dominant point. You can go back and read this from the 1890s. But I think it's true in America also. And I think that's, for me, I grew up in a community that was 100% Jewish, right? So for me, I sort of always had these views baked in. I mean, that I grew up near UCSD in La Jolla. It was actually illegal for Jews to buy property in La Jolla until the 1960s. And, it was a very waspy neighborhood, growing up, I always wore a kippah. Once a week, somebody would shout out something to me out of a car, dirty Jew or F you or something,
Wow.
When the community tried to set up an Eruv, right? An Eruv is a string that goes around a community that allows Orthodox Jews to carry objects on Shabbat, without getting into the legal theory there, right? There was so much opposition, and people basically said, we don't want more Jews moving into the neighborhood. So all that's to say, I think it's particularly shocking for a lot of American Jews growing up, outside of the Jewish community, because they were used to thinking, oh, of course, we're a part of these liberal or progressive groups and everybody loves us and we come out to care about Black rights or LGBTQ rights or all those things. And then when we need protection, they'll come out, on our behalf. And that just hasn't been true. And so it doesn't mean we give up on the values. I mean, values of racial and sexual justice are very important, but it does mean that we can't sit back and think, there's a whole cohort and allyship of people that are going to come to our backs. And, this is the exact same thing that I think Israel is dealing with now in its impending war with Lebanon and everything there. And so the short answer is no, there was virtually zero non-Jews on campus in the faculty or grad students that said anything. There was 2 or 3 students that I know well that aren't Jewish that came to me and asked how I'm doing, or have family in Israel, so how the family's doing. Virtually, complete radio silence from everyone else. And this is also the experience, board, on almost every campus.
Yeah. I know the American Jewish Committee in their 2023 report, Antisemitism in America survey, the American Jews said 93% of Jews reported that anti-Semitism is a problem, whereas 75% of the general public thought it was a problem. And I suppose that's natural. We are concerned first, probably, about our own. That's human nature. But having a 75% of the general public thinking it was a problem, there's obviously a recognition there is a problem. But what you're saying is they say, yeah, but so what? They're not doing anything to back up to help the situation. You say that is how you believe?
Yeah, it's not even, I have a stronger view than I think most people appreciate. I just think they're in the Western world, whether we're talking about the legacy of Christianity, the legacy of Protestant Reformation, even the legacy of the Enlightenment, obviously Islam, there's just a type of systemic anti-Semitism there that I think it's not always there, but it's always latent in some way that times in history, one community could be better to us than another. But again, just the world in the last 2,000 years have never treated Jews as just regular people as a part of the society, right? Jews have always been singled out, not always for bad, but the Jews have always received a disproportionate amount of attention and blame when things goes wrong and media spotlight when anything funky happens, conspiracy theories on the right, conspiracy theories on the left. And this is also mixed with, there's just a lot of confusion about who Jews are. Are we a religion, an ethnicity, a race, a nation, some weird mixture of all of them, none of them. And so for a lot of non-Jews, they just don't even know how to start to tackle, even if they want to help, they just see all this and they're confused and they don't really know how saying Israel is a genocidal colonial state, how does that fit into anti-Semitism, right? You're not really talking about Jews and Judaism there. So there's just like a big hill to climb to even understand why the Jewish community is so upset. And that mixed with, again, in most cultures within the Western world, there just is a lot of latent anti-Semitism, both when you go far enough right, obviously historic nationalism and fascism has led to anti-Semitism. If you go far enough left, Marxism and socialism, the Soviet Union was a huge proliferator of anti-Semitism. If you go far enough into, radical Islam, obviously you get anti-Semitism. If you go deep enough into radical or fundamentalist Christianity, obviously you get anti-Semitism. And so any worldview that, one might adopt in the Western world, it sort of leads to a little bit of anti-Semitism. And I don't mean this as stark as I'm painting it out, but it just means I just think we have to be clear-eyed about what's going to help solve the problem of anti-Semitism. And it's not one more progressive event where, we have leaders from this community and we all sit down and, bake cookies together, because that's just not, that just hasn't helped in the last 150 years. It is sort of, in my opinion, the Herzl model of, if we are a strong community, and I'm the American Jewish community, and we are, and whatever that means, in America, if we're a strong force in labor, then we're gonna earn respect. But I don't think Jews can't sit back and say, well, we deserve to be treated equally. Of course we do, but that just hasn't been true historically. So now we have to sort of go out and earn it.
Well, we're only 2.4% of the US population and 0.2 of the world's population. With all the different conspiracy theories of us ruling the world, etc., ruling the media, in the numbers, it just doesn't make sense. Did any of the students come to you and say they were scared to be on campus, or they were on some campuses, they were followed? At UCLA, the pro-Palestinian students took over the library and wouldn't allow Jewish students into the library, even if their classes were being held there. Did any of that kind of situation
There wasn't
happen?
the type of actually blocking anyone from coming in the same way at UCLA. But yeah, people were definitely scared. It's scary if, say your roommates are hanging up, I don't know, posters that say, globalize the Intifada. It's scary if your coach on whatever team you play for, tweeting out the martyrs of Hamas, blah, blah, blah. It's scary if your professor is sending out an email talking about the great liberation of Palestine on October 8th. So in that sense, there was a lot of fear. I think everybody's feeling a little bit more fear, the American Jewish community. I did an entire podcast talking about self-defense on my podcast. And, I sort of talked about started carrying around pepper spray and a pocket knife. And I haven't actually bought a gun yet, but it is on my list to get a gun for home defense. And I think that's the responsible thing to do in some sense. Really in general, I think Europe is probably the best place to look, just for people not paying attention. The anti-Semitism in Europe now is one magnitude worse than America, right? Europe, you really do have Jewish stores and Jewish shops, getting broken into consistently. I just went to Barcelona in March, and it was on Purim. So I went to some small synagogue in Purim. And when I walked in, the rabbi made sure to come up to me and say, by the way, make sure you don't wear your kippah at all in the city. That's scary to be hearing that in a Western first world country in 2024. I don't know if America is going to get there. I hope not. I don't even think so. But we definitely have to be prepared for that. And so, again, I think the theme that I think I'm coming back to over and over again is just we have to take in our own community's ability to thrive and also our community's ability to protect itself in our own hands and not say, well, if something happens, I can just worry about surely the Democrats will come and save me, or surely the police will come and save me. Maybe they will, maybe they won't, but they're a lot more fickle than if we just kind of trust ourselves.
Very close to campus is the Orange County Islamic Foundation, and the imam there, Tariq Atta, was saying some really disturbing things, and I wanted to show a short clip about what he was saying.
By your courage, and we love you and what you are doing. And I remind you that every step you take for the sake of Allah in this cause will get you hasanat. That every ounce of fear and anger that you put in the heart of Netanyahu and his thugs and all those who support and collaborate and finance this violence and this inhumane war against a primarily civilian population. Every ounce of fear you put in their hearts by your lawful protest is rewarded by Allah, as the Quran says. وَلَا يَطَعُونَ مَوْطِئًا يَغِيظُ الْكُفَّارِ وَلَا يَنَالُونَ مِنْ عَدُوٍ نَيْلًا إِلَّا كُتِبَ لَهُمْ بِهِ عَمَلٌ صَالِحٌ إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُضِيعُ أَجْرَ الْمُحْسِنِينَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in this verse, whatever step you take that brings pain, emotional pain, that brings fear in the hearts of these cruel people, these enemies of humanity, that you will be rewarded for it.
His mosque is very close to UCI.
Sure. This is the reason why I don't believe that there's going to be peace between the Israelis and Palestinians until the Islamic world goes through a reformation. Essentially, the Western view of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is that this is a conflict over resources, land, gas, water, whatever you want to call it. The reality is, again, not everybody, but the forces that are the loudest in the pro-Palestinian community, this guy, Hamas, Hezbollah, the Iranian government, the Houthis, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, they're a religious group, and religious groups, again, I grew up in an Orthodox community. When a religious person says that they believe God has commanded them to do A, B, and C, and they will go to heaven as a result, and so they don't actually care if they either get arrested or die or, whatever, we have to take them seriously. And I think, that's just the reality. And so it's sad to see it. It's scary. I'm less physically scared for my own safety when I see that. It's more just sad because theory, I want, there to be a peace treaty between the Israelis and Palestinians, but I just don't see how that's going to be possible when there are forces like that are basically calling everybody who supports Israel infidels. Usually the, infidel in the Islamic community is not, a nice, funny word that everyone laughs at. It's usually a death sentence, when you're in any Islamic country. So I don't know. Obviously I think that video speaks for itself.
Whenever I listen to it, I think of the fact that he first calls out Netanyahu and his quote unquote thugs, but they're 7,500 miles away.
Well, the thugs are presumably pro-Israel or Jews and.
Then he says, and those who support. Therefore, he is encouraging, as far as I see, violence towards local Jews too. So I find that disconcerting. So you say that you're personally not really scared? Why?
So I'm a little more scared than normal, but I'm not terrified. There really hasn't been a ton of violence against Jews in America from the far left. Again, it could change. I don't want us to turn into Europe. So I don't want to jinx it, but I think I'm 10 to 15% more scared than I was, this time exactly a year ago. But it's more just the breakdown of society that I'm more long-term scared than short-term scared, right? I'm scared that now, you listen to NPR and it sounds like it's a, Hamas propaganda tool. And, I say that as a liberal. Right? Why can't NPR say that Hezbollah is a terrorist group? Why do they say it's a, militia or Hezbollah militants as opposed to terrorists? Same thing with Hamas. I just think that a lot of people have radical ideologues, either, Islamists or far leftists that, we do understand what they're doing. And they're trying to, basically destroy the West. And then you have foolish liberals who kind of go along with it that don't really see how bad this is. That's why I'm more scared long term. Like I don't even know where to go to get unbiased news anymore, right? It used to be, I used to figure, okay, I turn on New York Times and CNN, and that's basically true, even if it's 10% biased, it's better than Fox with 60% biased. Now I sort of view them as much closer, right? I don't think anybody listening to just NPR, CNN, and the New York Times, I don't think they have any sense of a reality picture of what's happening, not just on, Israel-Palestinian conflict, on really anything. And so I think that's just bad for the world in general, right? Like we have to get to a place where we have grown-up sources that we can trust with some measure of epistemological certainty and not just think everything is just biased and propaganda. Same thing with academics, right? Like I want to get to a point where if a political science professor comes out and comments on a policy, I want to get to a point where the public knows, okay, this is a wise person, we should probably listen to her, not, well, this is the same person that supported Hezbollah 2 years ago, so, why should I listen to their policy on taxes or whatever? So that's more what I'm scared for than going outside and getting punched in the face later today.
I wanted to get to what did happen with you. It was really something, in my opinion. Your classes were full and you got rave reviews to the point where when your contract was not renewed, there was a big protest by your students. So can you talk about what happened there?
Sure. The very long story short, there's been so much out about this. My contract wasn't renewed for one of the classes that I teach, a major Jewish text class. The way that it was canceled was very sketchy. It'll take half an hour to get into the full story, but, what you need to do is just Google Daniel Levine, UCI, and they'll see a myriad of articles. And yeah, the students came out very, all these open letters. I went to the media and emailed the administration. And ultimately, I didn't get that class back, but I ended up getting to teach a class in another department. But this is also, I still do think this is connected. The head of the history department at UC Irvine is extremely anti-Israel. It wasn't a pro-Israel class. It was a Jewish text class. We spent 1 week on Zionism, but the rest of the class, we're learning Talmud and Maimonides and other stuff like that. So yeah, I don't think that can be divorced from, the wider trends on campus last year. I am happy that it ended well. I think, I'm lucky enough to have, an entire Jewish community, both of students and also of people in the wider Orange County community who sort of know me and care enough to come out and help. I do think there is a trend, I mentioned this before, in some academic disciplines where saying that you're a Zionist is akin to saying you're a Nazi. It's just, or refusing, you basically have to, as a Jew, walk into a room and say, I am not a Zionist. I hate Israel. Now, you can play game. And that's almost a prerequisite for being accepted in good company. And that's a problem, again, because that's not where the majority of, really Americans in general are at. And so it's just pigeonholing these disciplines into more and more insane thinking.
I know when you look at Jewish history, the last 60 to 70 years seem like perhaps the golden age of Jews, and what's happening now seems to reflect, unfortunately, more of what has happened with the Jews over centuries. You want to comment about that?
Sure. Again, we're in such a weird period of Jewish history. It's hard to compare it to other times because the last 80 years, the Holocaust and the state of Israel and the American Jewish community, so many things have happened that would have been unthinkable, 200 years ago. We're definitely at an inflection point. The world in general is at an inflection point. So, of course, Jews are a part of the world. I don't know what's going to happen in the next 10 years. I certainly hope the American Jewish community can, I'm not one of these, we all need to move to Israel, it's not safe here, right? I don't like that perspective for a variety of reasons. So I hope, Israel continues to remain a strong Jewish and democratic country, right? There are also forces on the right in Israel that I think are trying to turn Israel increasingly illiberal. And, what Ben Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich have been doing, in the last couple of years, I think is just as bad for the country as people on college campuses saying globalize the Intifada. And so Israel is being attacked both physically and also internally, and also the American Jewish community. I mean, we have a lot to deal with. We have, changing political landscape. We have, but it's also an exciting time because, as we saw this past year, more Jews wanted to get involved with Jewish community and learning about Judaism. And, a lot of the 20th century ways of thinking about Jewish community have sort of evolved in the last couple of years. So I'm very optimistic in the wide scheme of things for the future of the American Jewish community.
Can you talk about your opinion that Zionism is the biggest anti-colonial successful movement?
Sure. Colonialism, just to define it, right? The idea of being conquered by an outside power and force. We tend to think of colonialism as a more modern phenomenon, but the ancient Roman Empire, enough written about this, the listeners, don't have to trust me. You can read about it. I mean, not that it was necessarily a colonialist power, but it basically did the same thing, right? It conquered all these other states and vassals and plundered it for resources and took the guys and, adopted it to the Roman army and had heavy tax rates and everything there. Obviously, the temple was destroyed by the Roman Empire. 60 years later, Jews were kicked out, the year 137 CE, 1900 years ago. And since then, Jews have been connected to our homeland, right? We've been in diaspora, thinking about, praying about, writing about the land of Israel. And in the 20th century, we return. And so in some way, I mean, this is a victory for indigenous peoples being kicked out of a homeland and returning there. And this used to be recognized by progressives, by the way. The outset of Zionism, many progressives were Zionists because they recognized this. Somehow, again, the wider Palestinian cause have sort of co-opted the narrative. The Soviet Union did a lot to muddy the waters there, not because they necessarily cared about Zionism or Israel, right? This was just an anti-Western. When Israel flipped from being more of a Soviet ally to a Western ally, Soviet Union started putting out all this anti-Semitic propaganda. But now we're at the point where there are people that don't even believe that Jews have a history in Israel and that Jews are indigenous to the land of Israel. But again, I don't know what's a more successful, I mean, everything about it, right? Hebrew was an indigenous language to the land of Israel from thousands of years ago. And in modern Zionism, it was reclaimed as the updated Jewish language. So Zionism is an enormous victory for decolonialism. And so, I think that it should be talked about. If you take a class on decolonization, Zionism should take up 2 weeks, not because Zionism is colonialism, but because it's actually a successful act of decolonialism.
I wanted to get back to what was happening on the campus because for several weeks, you, like many other campuses, had an encampment. And then finally, it was after Imam Atta spoke to the students, they took over the science building, and eventually the administration had the police take apart the encampment, and I wanted to show a clip.
Welcome to KCAL News at 8, streaming live on CBS News Los Angeles. I'm Susie Sa.
And I'm Chauncey Glover. We've been covering the unrest since it began shortly before 4 o'clock today.
That's right. Let's get you up to speed on the latest. Pro-Palestinian protesters who set up an encampment 2 weeks ago, blocking the entrance, and began occupying the Physical Sciences Lecture Hall this afternoon at the UC Irvine campus. University police declaring an unlawful assembly and calling for help from the Orange County Sheriff's Department, Irvine Police Department, Huntington Beach, Newport Beach, and also the UC campus police.
Now, officers then began to move in and clear the tent city and arrest the protesters. We have seen pushing, a little bit of shoving, but no major violent incidents here tonight. We do know all classes have been canceled this evening, and all staff was told to work remotely tomorrow, and students were also told to shelter in place.
So were you there when that was going on?
I was actually there on that day at the exact time, probably. Don't know if I got caught in any of the cameras. Yeah, I was there watching with a bunch of Jewish students.
And what did you think of all that?
It was crazy. I mean, obviously, I mean, again, I think a lot of these students don't really know what they were doing. They were kind of just going along with something that looked exciting. So I don't really blame them a ton. Honestly, I do think it was, again, the onus is more on the quote unquote adults in the room.
Did the administration defend you with your issue with your class?
Yeah, the administration was, I mean, again, the administration is sort of fragmented, but there were a lot of people that were very helpful at UCI.
And how about the Jewish students who were scared? Did they go to the
administration has been good. I mean, again, the administration has been captivated by this progressive mindset. EI is a part of it also that I just don't think is good for Jews in general. So I think there's a limit under the frameworks the administration is using as to how helpful they can be, but they have been helpful. I mean, they've been trying to be helpful.
We spoke a couple months ago, and since this is the new quarter, before I published the interview, I wanted to get a feel for how the fall is going with regard to anti-Semitism on campus. And then I learned of the Adas Israel Synagogue in Melbourne was attacked by arsonists. And if you aren't familiar with the story, here's a short clip.
First to our top story, and footage has emerged of the inside of the burnt-out Melbourne synagogue, which was targeted in an arson attack this morning. Senior reporter Simon Love joins us now. Simon, what does the footage show?
Well, this footage that I've obtained, Holly, shows the secondary brick building to the side of the main Holocaust, which was engulfed by fire. Shows inside a number of rooms being charred. Luckily, a number of books on the wall have been intact. But just the damage inside after it was set alight at 4:20 this morning. In a bit of a silver lining, in the last hour or so, a number of Torah scrolls from inside the synagogue, which are valued at around about $100,000 each, or even more, some of which had survived the Holocaust and were brought to the Adas Israel Synagogue. Well, they were found in the and intact. They've been taken away, and that much to the relief of the Jewish community, who will no doubt use those in prayer tonight. Now, this firebombing, which is being investigated by Victoria Police, has been treated as suspicious, and it has been unequivocally condemned by politicians on all sides of the political spectrum, particularly our federal leaders, Peter Dutton and Anthony Albanese.
To see the firebombing of a synagogue, a place of worship, is something that is not welcome and has no place in our country whatsoever. And today we should double down on our support of the Jewish community, who will be feeling this very acutely. There are armed guards who are protecting kids at Jewish schools this very day, and that is unacceptable in our country. There is a lot of work and a lot of leadership that needs to be provided to make sure that people of Jewish faith and people right across the country can be given assurances around safety.
This is an act of hate, and it's something that should not occur in Australia or anywhere else for that matter. An attack on a synagogue is an act of anti-Semitism by definition. They're liaising at this point. Big Pole are the lead organisation at this point, sure. But obviously the nature of this, and this is clearly an act of anti-Semitism.
There were two people that were inside studying and doing prayers at about 4:20 this morning. They heard a large bang, and essentially the premises around them caught alight. They were able to get out. One of them suffered quite serious burn injuries to their arm. Another, who I spoke to, had injuries to his hand. Take a listen to what he described.
He saw two guys with balaclavas on, and they had the big cans of petrol or something, and they threw it inside. And he scrimped at them, and they ran away.
I wrote a Times of Israel blog about it, and before we get into what's happening at the UCI, I wanted to ask if you wanted to comment about what happened in Australia.
Sure. I mean, it's still, we're still learning the details. So, we're talking now, it's, Friday, December 6th. I mean, obviously it's terrible. I think it's horrifying. Australia has had anti-Semitism in the past, but Australia is obviously not Europe or anywhere else that has sort of a history of anti-Semitism. So I think the ideology of globalizing the Intifada, which obviously we've seen a lot in the last year, I mean, it's working. The Intifada is being globalized, and this is resulting in everything we've seen. Obviously, we were talking 3 weeks ago, we could have been talking about what happened in Amsterdam, which I know you also wrote about, and of course what happened, in Australia. It's all sort of the same thing. It's this, new form of anti-Semitism that just uses the form of anti-Zionism, and it's sad and it's also scary.
Yeah, and we don't know that they were even using anti-Zionism, particularly since they attacked a synagogue, but it's pretty horrific. I will say that at least the politicians there don't seem to be ignoring it, which is nice to hear. That's for sure. Many campuses are saying that fall has begun with anti-Semitism being even worse than it was last year. And now that we're over 2 months into the new quarter, has the anti-Semitism continued on UCI's campus? And if so, what's happened?
If you would have asked me 2 years ago, if I would have taken a time machine from 2022 to this year, I would have said that, oh my God, there's so much anti-Semitism. At least in Orange County at UCI specifically, compared to last spring, things are much better because just, 2 or 3 data points. Then we can talk about the things that are still that aren't great.
Right.
One, there's no encampment. So
Okay, that's great.
For 6 to 7 weeks, you were unable to walk through campus, the center of campus. I taught a course last spring, medieval Jewish philosophy class at UCI, and my classroom was about 50 feet from the encampment. And so for about almost 2 months, it was impossible to walk through campus for me to get to my class without walking through a whole slew of signs. And so this year we don't have that. So already that makes a huge concrete difference. There have been some anti-Israel rallies on campus. October 7th itself was a pretty awful day because, of course, a lot of the anti-Israel groups decided to hold a massive protest against Israel on October 7th. Which, again, for so many reasons makes no sense because October 7th was not the start of Israel bombing Gaza. Presumably, this is just about helping the Palestinians. This should have started October 8th when Israel actually started to retaliate. Commemorating this on October 7th is really just a way, in my opinion, of saying, isn't this a great day? We're commemorating it. So October 7th itself was pretty awful to see that on campus. There were a couple hundred students, probably also with a mix of grad students and faculty. But since then, campus has been pretty quiet. There's still this sort of normally scheduled anti-Israel stuff. I'm putting that in quotations. There was an anti-Israel week a couple weeks ago, but it was very small, was very sparsely attended.
Is this becoming normalized in your mind? As far as you sound like it's like what else is new kind of thing.
A little bit, but it's also getting, I think last spring, it was the new thing to do. And so many people, there's sort of 3 groups that exist in this anti-Israel context on campus, right? There are generally Arab or Muslim students that a lot of times just in perhaps their local communities or education system, they are being taught that Israel is this huge threat, and there's obviously a lot of historical religious animosity there in the sense where, Harviv Gur, who's a journalist for Times of Israel, writes beautifully about this. His theory is that the Islamic world used to be in the, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th century, the sort of pinnacle of success in the world in terms of arts and science and literature and philosophy and all these things. And then of course, in the last 400 or 500 years, it's sort of been on the wane in terms of its ability to produce and also its relative success. And his theory is that Israel is the epitome of this dwindling of the Islamic, basically the height of Islamic power, because all of a sudden, right in the center of the Middle East are this Western and non-Islamic / Jewish nation that when Islam was at its height, Israel was in their control. And so in a lot of ways, he connects it to this. So you have the sort of Muslim or Arab population, right? That group has always sort of been historically anti-Israel. So that group hasn't changed much. Maybe they're a little bit louder, but that's sort of the same. The second is you have the sort of radical left-wing thinkers. On campus, this is the disproportionate number of grad students and professors that are generally in the left-leaning disciplines, humanities, and other things. They've also always been there. Maybe there's a little bit more of that because I think there's generally a problem in certain fields at universities of, almost you have to be a left-wing thinker to get in. But the real shock last spring was that the mainstream liberals, right? Most people on campus, most students are just mainstream liberal, right? They voted for Kamala Harris, so they're certainly not on the right, but they're not revolutionaries. They're not Marxists. They don't want Israel to be destroyed, but they're also very much in favor of social justice, but they don't really know much about Israel. And so what we saw last spring, or really last year on campus, was the anti-Israel movement sort of won over that group. There's a lot to talk about in terms of the tactics, but if you were a general liberal last year on campus, you probably were in some way involved, or at least thinking about, or posting about, or joining the encampment, or thinking Israel's doing something bad to the Palestinians. And that group this year, both at UCI and also, I would argue, more nationally, has started to recede from anti-Israel movement. I have a couple of theories that I'm happy to get into, but so there's still a lot of anti-Israel stuff happening on campuses across the country, but in some way it's been shaved back to sort of the normally scheduled, this is where you get to your comment before, the sort of Islamists and also the left-wingers, but there were always sort of those strong ideological thinkers on campus. They have a little bit more power now. The problem is they control a lot of the power that exists within institutions. But in terms of compared to last March and April and May, things have definitely been better this year on campus.
I don't recall if UCI was mentioned. I think the UC campuses, particularly UCLA, was mentioned as far as the donations for the budget. Do you know if the Arab states are donating much to the budget there?
I don't know that offhand.
How are your fellow professors treating you?
So it's good. I mean, I've been teaching this year and teaching the humanities anymore.
Right.
So everything has been good. Listen, the other quasi elephant in the room, not really elephant, but the election that just took place a month ago took up so much bandwidth, and still it's taking up so much bandwidth on campus that I think Israel, Palestine, certainly not for Jews, because there's still rampant anti-Semitism.
Right.
You know, we just opened up by talking about Australia. But in terms of where the critical mass is, right now, the critical mass on campus is thinking about the fact that Trump just got reelected, not really thinking about Israel that much anymore. There's some other reasons why I think the picture has been a little bit more complicated. Things have been a lot more civil this year. Of course, I think the entire culture became a little bit more anti-Semitic, and a lot of the institutions. So I don't want to sugarcoat it, but I also think things are slowly trending in the right direction now, because I think there is starting to be a correction to this insanity of just everybody supporting Hamas and everybody's anti-Israel. So it's a little bit nuanced. The anti-Semitism now is a little bit more widespread, but I think the sort of the depth of that anti-Semitism doesn't run as deep in the average person as it was looking like last May on campus.
Has the administration put into effect any new rules,
Yeah,
or
so-
are they supporting what they already had in place but didn't support before?
A mixture of both. So the entire UC system, the region, spent the summer trying to figure out this exact question, because obviously it doesn't make a school look great when their entire campus gets taken over by protesters. So the school has both created new rules, is also enforcing those rules harder. I think also part of it at UCI is, I'm forgetting the exact number, it's just an easy Google search for listeners, but the local DA, Todd Spitzer in Orange County, is going on and prosecuting a lot of the people who were arrested last year. And so there's actually, real repercussion now. I do think this has somewhat played the role of, to some percentage of people who were just kind of like in it for the ride, I think now they're realizing, no, there's actually going to be real consequence when you do things like take over buildings on campus and disrupt academic talks and everything there.
On UCI's campus, are Jews considered part of the DEI programming?
So DEI is pretty broad at UCI, so I don't know about like any of the specific programs. Culturally, I think DEI has sort of failed Jews, and so I don't think DEI, the entire infrastructure and the entire idea of it, either needs to be fully rebooted or just scrapped.
Have the students at Hillel commented on how they're feeling on campus?
Yeah, so I think a lot of them, sort of gauging majority opinion here, wrapped up in my opinion, I think a lot of them also feel a little bit of a relief that this year is not as bad as last year. And again, not saying that things are perfect, but we thought things would be much worse this year. That's
Yeah,
sort
well,
of,
there definitely are campuses that are. So it's good
I think
news
a lot
that
of the campuses,
yours
a lot of the
isn't.
campuses that actually weren't terrible last year are getting worse this year. And this is a generalization, but some of the campuses that went pretty bad last year, a lot of them self-corrected. So there is a trend now of a lot of like the smaller, so like Chapman University, again, I don't know a ton about Chapman because I don't really work there, but I have a lot of ears to the ground. Chapman this year seems worse than last year in terms of Israel on campus and anti-Semitism, whereas UCI is much better. But last
How's
year, UCI was much
UCLA?
worse.
Since they were horrific last year.
So I think UCLA also is not perfect, but it's definitely better than last year. Again, UCLA's in campus.
Last year was pretty.
Again, that's what I'm saying. It's not a hard threshold to beat, but UCLA, I mean, literally had the encampment, blocking off the main access, through campus. I know when I was in undergrad and grad school at UCLA, I was in that library every single day where the encampment was right out of. I can't imagine having been a student last year at UCLA.
And not being allowed in, and the wristbands and all that is just really pretty much unbelievable. Have you run into any issues with your former colleagues in the other department or with the administration now that you've changed departments?
No, I mean, everyone that talks to me is super supportful. I mean, one of the ironies of all of this is that campus is funny because people don't like conflict on the especially in the faculty administration. So if somebody doesn't like you, they'll generally just ignore you. Again, this is a generalization. I just have had very little interaction with any humanities professors, but the professors that I tend to be closer to are in other disciplines and other schools on campus. But there hasn't been any explicit animosity or anything like that.
Have there been any lectures, say, from Israelis that have been shut down?
No, but there also haven't really been any academic talks by Israelis. I mean, Hillel has done a number of public-facing Jewish events. So we actually, on October 7th, we had a whole, memorial and vigil out. We did that. There are other days where we had other educational programs. One of the students made this beautiful, she called it the Western Wall of Wisdom, which was, a massive panel talking about a lot of the history of Israel and a lot of, Jewish significance of connection to the land and sort of Israel 101 that was put in the middle of campus to invite conversation. And it really did. And there was some great conversation out of it. And so there's been a lot of that. And that's gotten, some amount of pushback, but nothing too crazy. But
there were nobody taking down signs or taking down
nothing to that extent. But even I'll just say in terms of signs, that's another thing in terms of, the shift between last year and this year. Last year on every surface of campus, there was some anti-Israel poster. And I haven't really seen any. I'm on campus every day for 6-7 hours a day. And I just haven't really seen any posters or flyers that are anti-Israel. So I'm not really sure why, to be honest. I mean, I have a couple theories why some of it's gotten better, but I've been shocked by the lack of anti-Israel stuff that at least is visible on campus this year.
Oh, great. Let's whatever's keeping it away. I hope it stays. That's for sure. Anyway, today is Friday, so Shabbat Shalom.
Yeah, Shabbat Shalom.
And I hope it stays this way for everyone's happiness. So
yeah, again, I don't think we can which is why, I guess like all good Jewish thinkers, I sort of have the two sides that are endlessly battling it out. I mean, it's not to say we should get
not three sides.
No, yeah, the three sides. But I don't think we should get too overconfident. So I think, there still are people who clearly don't like us that are probably having their own meetings right now as we speak, trying to figure out, how to harm the wider Jewish community. And so just because things are slightly getting a little bit better right now, it doesn't mean there can't be another thing that happens at any moment. News can change. And it has been really shocking. 2 weeks ago, on my podcast, I talked to a professor who studies Europe. And so we did the whole podcast on anti-Semitism in Europe. And if I was living in London or Paris or Amsterdam right now, I'd be terrified. It's all perspective. And I don't think America is going to ever be as bad as Paris is, but you never know. I mean, it's hard to say never when we know Jewish history.
That is true. Well, I'm really, really pleased to hear that things there are not as bad as they were last quarter, and let's hope it stays that way. Have a great night. Are you having students over tonight at all?
We are, yeah. So got to go set up for Shabbat now.
Oh, marvelous. Okay, well, have a great Shabbat.
Yes, thank you so much. Bye.
Bye-bye. You can always see the recordings on our Peace with Penny YouTube channel. Thank you, and may you live in peace, shalom, and salam.